for weathering the elements. Some of you were at the first talk we just had by Colin Bird from Eddie Bauer. I might make the same joke again, that it's beautiful and sunny today, but we know it is not always like that in Seattle. So today we are kind of celebrating and appreciating what goes into making clothing that can withstand the rain. And our next presenter, Tanya Knannlein, is going to tell us a lot more about that technology. Like, what is it in those fibers that really make it able to be waterproof? Before we start the talk, though, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that today we gather at MOHAI on the historic and contemporary lands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Coast Salish people. We acknowledge the forced displacement of Native communities from this land while honoring the endurance of the Duwamish people who still live here. To this day, the Duwamish people have yet to receive federal recognition. And here at MOHAI, we encourage you to go to West Seattle, where there's the Duwamish Longhouse and Cultural Center, to learn more. Understanding our past connects us to the present, and MOHAI is committed to exploring the full complexity of everything in our history. So, I now would like to introduce our presenter. Tanya Knannlein has designed clothes for men, children, and women for over 10 years in the Seattle fashion industry before branching into freelance textile design. She currently teaches technology, design, and textile classes at the School of Apparel Design and Development. So please give a round of applause.
Thank you. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about waterproof breathable textiles. So our last presenter went into some of those aspects, and I'll be talking a little bit more about some of the, getting a little bit more into the technical reasons of it. So I thought I would just quickly address some of the historical ways of waterproof protecting from the elements. So 1805, we have evidence of use of elk skin. So fur and leather has been used for many years for weathering the elements. But as you can see here, Clark is complaining that he lay wet in the very cold. So perhaps breathable, not necessarily completely waterproof. This one is also a little bit, I'm saying that it's not breathable. That's a little bit controversial perhaps because cotton is very absorbent, and so it allows the wearer to be very comfortable. It's so absorbent, you might have heard the term cotton kills in terms of outdoor fabric, so it absorbs so much that sometimes it gets wet and then that can be cold. In the case of tin cloth or waxed cotton, the absorbency of the fibers is used to absorb wax, and so it creates a waterproof fabric due to the impregnation of paraffin. And that also then blocks the breathability of the fabric. So arguably, you could say that the breathability is still through holes in the fabric, but the actual absorbency of the cotton is destroyed by being impregnated with paraffin. I highly recommend exploring the wax coating. Have you guys been out there yet to explore the wax coating? So that's a great, fun way to waterproof fabric. Wax cotton will need reapplication of wax coating periodically. And some of the limitations of wax cotton are just the weight and the flexibility. I just had a graduate of our program show me some of the tin cloth pants from Filson, and they were standing on their own. So that, limits mobility a little bit. We're going to be talking about PFCs sort of throughout the talk, and so one advantage of wax cotton is that there are no PFCs involved and no petroleum-based fabrics. What are PFCs? We're going to get into that. So also, I just wanted to give a nod to another graduate of ours, Miriam Rigby, who created this company, Clear Coated. And they're beautiful rain jackets, really fun. You can show off your outfit through them. They are, again, a traditional way of waterproofing, vinyl, rubber, and Colin talked a little bit about those fabrics as well. It's completely waterproof, great. But the breathability is where the trade-off comes. So you'll see holes in the pits often for breathability, And these are really made more for, you know, looking good about town rather than going for a hike. Intestines, another way that natives, I know that they talk about the cedar bark in terms of waterproofing as a traditional native way of waterproof clothing, having waterproof clothing, but also Native Alaskans and Native Northwest cultures sewed and glued seal and whale intestines into jackets. So really ingenious and waterproof breathable, not terribly manufacturable. So why waterproof breathable, or what are the aspects of waterproof breathable? Basically, it needs to prevent the wearer from getting wet, and it allows moisture vapor, i.e. sweat or perspiration, to be released. So in other words, if you are doing activity in the rain, like hiking, you tend to perspire and you want to feel comfortable in your clothing. If it's completely non-moisture, non-permeable, you'll feel uncomfortable. A couple of key elements that we'll be talking about in terms of waterproof breathable fabric. One is a microporous film, and the other is durable water-resistant finish. So these are kind of two of the key innovations for modern waterproof breathable fabrics. Gore-Tex, probably everybody's heard of Gore-Tex. Certainly, you know, we need it in the Northwest, and if you're visiting from out of town, you probably still have heard of it. So invented in 1976, so Bob Gore stretched polytetrafluoroethylene, I had to practice saying that one, and discovered that you could make a microporous film with this naturally waterproof, windproof, and chemically inert material. So the key there is that water, as a liquid, the molecules congregate. And so as they congregate together, they are larger than the micropores that are in this film. However, water vapor is a gas. And so those gas molecules are free to roam, and they're very small, and they're able to escape the jacket, or film, if it's in the jacket. So a film with pores that were 700 times larger than a water vapor molecule, but 20,000 times smaller than a droplet. So as Colin mentioned too, use of Gore-Tex in garments was adopted early here in the Northwest. Early Winters was a clothing store and catalog. They also did gear in Gore-Tex, and it proved to be really popular. In 1979, seam sealing was added. So if you can imagine, as you are sewing seams, it creates holes. And I have just one of my old jackets here, and you can see the seam sealing here basically waterproofs those seams for a more effective waterproofing. So that was another great innovation in terms of the waterproof functionality. Gore-Tex, and so Gore-Tex is basically, you know, like the well-known name in this field. They were the early inventors of this. Interestingly, Gore-Tex regulates a lot of their fabric use. So part of their effectiveness is that they also require manufacturers to use their own seam sealing, and they require manufacturers to send the garments that are using Gore-Tex to the Gore-Tex facility for intense testing. And so that kind of has ensured a really high level of quality when something has the Gore-Tex certification on it. So in addition, I always think apparel because that's my background. In addition to apparel applications, it's been used in gloves, in boots, and even in spacesuits. So you know, the advent of Gore-Tex has made a lot of travel possible. So even to the Arctic, and you know, allowed people to withstand other extreme weather situations. Interestingly, other applications of just Gore-Tex, the Glide dental floss that you might use, that's also the same EPTFE material. And it's also used a lot in medical applications. This is an image here of some of those some of the first early Winters jackets. So in 1997, Gore's patent expired, and that allowed for other companies to develop their own proprietary microporous films. And so we see other membranes come into the market, some things that you probably have seen on jackets, high vent, dry vent, H2O membrane. In addition to the expanded polytetrafluoroethylene, not sure I got that right. In addition to those, polyurethane and polyester are used for these microporous films. So just a little bit of an overview of the construction of these. There's actually a fabric outer layer. So this is a protective layer, usually made from a hydrophobic or water repellent fiber. So high durability at the exterior. Then we have the membrane, and then we may or may not have another additional fabric at the interior. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that construct, but just for your reference, this is a little bit of a diagram of how a waterproof breathable fabric might be constructed. We talked a little bit about water repellency. So there are degrees of water repellency in these fabrics. There's the American Association of Textile and Colorists and Chemists, AATCC, has really regulated tests that do, and those tests can take a number of different methods. They have highly regulated tests to determine the functionality of these fabrics. So as a manufacturer, you might order several different tests by the AATCC. There is testing to measure rain, spray, impact penetration, and the most commonly used test is the hydrostatic pressure test. So the way that this works, there's a little bit of a diagram here. There's a 1x1 tube that's put on top of the fabric, and then the water is filled within that tube, and the rating relates to how many millimeters you can suspend over the fabric before it starts to seep through the fabric. So there is a range of waterproofness or water resistance that you can have in fabrics. REI lists 3, and this can also be measured in pounds per square inch or millimeters. So REI lists 3 psi, or translated to 2K millimeters, as the standard for light rain, and you can see that that number gets higher in terms of resistance. So a 20K fabric is quite water resistant. So 10K is really considered waterproof, and below that is considered water resistant. Moisture vapor transfer rate is another key attribute that these waterproof breathable fabrics have. So this is the breathability aspect. So the MVTR is measured how many grams of water vapor pass through a square meter in 24 hours. And so, again, this is an AATCC test that is highly regulated. There's a range of regulation, so 8,000 to 15,000. Really, we have, you can have high breathability. The downside of high breathability is that if vapor is going out, it also means that wind can come in, right? So that goes both ways. And if too much wind can come in, then the wearer might lose body heat. Also, garments with less breathability, we sort of have this convention of having pit zips. I did do this presentation for my daughter. She's like, I think you should come up with a different name for that. And she's like, maybe underarm zips. I'm like, well, they're actually called pit zips. Anyway, so here's just a jacket, right, where we might have the ability to unzip in an area of high moisture vapor on our bodies to regulate the heat, or the venting, sorry. Another term that's used in terms of breathability is resistance to evaporative heat transfer. So RET is another index of how breathable a fabric is. In this case, you actually want a low number. And that's all relative. So it's all relative to the kind of activity that you're doing, right? So if you're just taking a walk in the city, you're probably great with a number like a 20 RET index. But if you are climbing Mount Rainier, you probably want a higher index. Oh, I wanted to make a nod to this image here. This is actually not the official test, but this is a very visual test where there's a jar and you can pump air into the jar. There's water on top of the cloth, and you can see the bubbles coming through. So it's just a visual of that breathability. The other thing that you can do in terms of breathability is you can actually, I don't necessarily recommend this, but you can actually just test the breathability of a fabric by breathing through it. And the resistance that you might get, will indicate, give you at least a comparative indication of how breathable that fabric is. Another factor in terms of waterproof breathable fabric is the capillary action. So capillary action happens when moisture vapor naturally wants to go towards dry air. So moisture vapor will naturally move toward dry air due to differential pressure. If you're wearing a jacket in the humid rainforest where it's very warm and humid, you might not get the same, you won't get the same breathability that you would in the Northwest if we have less humidity and colder temperatures. So that capillary action is actually key to the functionality of the breathability of the fabrics. So waterproof breathable fabrics will not operate effectively if humidity is higher than inside the jacket humidity. The other factor that we mentioned is DWR, durable water resistant finish. So hydrophobic, meaning water repelling, chemicals are applied to the fabric surface. So there is this fabric surface typically, then we have a film, and we need to make sure that the water doesn't penetrate the fabric surface, otherwise known as wetting out, because that will then prevent the ventilation, and it will also just feel really cold and clammy. The weight of the jacket will make you feel cold and clammy. So with durable water-resistant finishes, the water beads on the surface and prevents the top layer of fabric from getting wet. The way that works is we have these water-repellent radicals, it says here, these sort of fingers that stand up on the surface of the fabric, and they force the water to bead and then fall off the surface of the jacket. So they're protecting the surface of the jacket. They do get degraded by oil and dirt. So they can sort of get washed, and then the jacket loses its functionality. So washing your waterproof breathable fabric is actually a good thing because it will clear the dirt and the oils and renew the durable water-resistant finish a little bit. Abrasion will also wear away this durable water-resistant finish. So if you have abrasion on the jacket, it will also sort of scrape off the surface. And so there are a number of consumer products that you can just spray onto your jacket to renew the durable water-resistant finish. So you know, every once in a while, if your jacket loses functionality, you might need to reapply. A little word about the durable water-resistant finishes. For a long time, C8, or perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, was the standard for a durable water-resistant finish on jackets. The problem is that that chemical, that carbon chain, is really harmful to the environment. So it's bioaccumulative, meaning that it takes a really, really long time to degrade, and it has been found in a lot of water sources. So ironically, you know, the people who are going out in nature wearing these jackets so that they can enjoy a, you know, lovely hike or climb a mountain or do that kind of thing are also actually, you know, contributing to this issue of pollution of the environment. So by 2015, C8s were actually voluntarily they were voluntarily removed from the market. And in general, C6, so carbon form of 6 strands, became the new standard. So it's slightly less water resistant, slightly less effective, but it does break down sooner. It still is not great. So it still has harmful effects, but again, it does break down sooner than the C8. A little bit about fabric constructions. We're going to come back to that issue in a minute, at the end actually. So a couple of ways that we can apply this film. One is by bonding, and the other is with coating. So bonding is essentially gluing, and this gluing creates what's called a compound fabric, where we can have more than one fabric. We can have a durable exterior woven, and we can have a nice fuzzy fleece at the inside, and sandwiched in between we might have that waterproof breathable membrane, the microporous membrane. So bonding applies adhesive or heat to seal all of those fabrics together. And the glue itself is really proprietary. The process is very proprietary, very secretive, but it can affect the breathability. If you imagine that we're applying sort of this adhesive in the fabric, it can affect the breathability. Coatings, instead of being glued, the polymer is applied to the fabric. So this is, if we think about bonding as sort of gluing pieces of fabric together, this one is more like painting it on. So the film is set to a specific thickness, and then it's applied directly to the fabric here. And then you can see that there's a heat process there. So in general, a coating will be lower price with still decent performance and is very lightweight. Probably you've heard about the different layers, and so I was just going to go a little bit into that. We can have a 3-layer fabric, we can have a 2-layer fabric, we can have a 2.5-layer fabric. And so a 2-layer fabric has this outer layer. It can be bonded or coated to the membrane, the microporous membrane. And then it will have a separate lining because the membrane itself needs a little bit of protection from the body. It's also not terribly comfortable. You'll get a chance to feel it. So it's not necessarily something that you want to have next to your body. So typically a 2-layer fabric coat will have a lining that's attached in it. So ironically, the 2-layer, it actually ends up being a little bit more bulkier and heavier weight than some of the other options. Here you can see the example of the 2-layer fabric. A 3-layer will have an outer fabric, again, usually something that's very durable, that will protect against the elements. Then it has the microporous film, and then it has an inner layer. And so that in this case, the inner layer is all bonded together. The 3 layers are bonded together, and it actually creates a lighter weight, less bulky fabric. So this is really more typical for more technical applications. A 2.5-layer has an outer fabric. The film is bonded or coated to it, but then there's a print, what's called a dry touch print, applied to the back of it. And what that does is it protects the film, the microporous film, and it also feels better on the body. So the print itself is hydrophilic, meaning that it absorbs moisture, and so it tends to feel comfortable against the skin. So this also provides less bulk, is less breathable, but more affordable. So it's also really commonly used for casual wearing. Some newer innovations, one that I didn't address but that I should talk about is just that stretch has become really widely used. And so we see a lot of fabrics, there's more and more stretch available, which gives higher comfort basically, more movability in use in combination with breathable microporous membranes. Also, Columbia has developed an exterior membrane. So instead of sandwiching the membrane between layers of fabric, they have actually put this membrane on the outside. So it's become durable enough that it's on the outside. It requires no durable water-resistant finish. So this is a positive, as we know, in terms of environmental concerns. And it also creates a really lightweight fabric. So the membrane is on the outside, and then we just have another layer on the inside for comfort. Also, in terms of fabrics, you guys have probably heard of microfibers. And microfibers are basically very small fibers. So it's what differentiates 1960s polyester that feels terrible from newer polyesters that feel really good. Well, that spinning technology has gotten even better, and we can produce nanofibers. So the nanofibers are able to be constructed with the same sort of microporous structure. Instead of a film, though, it's using fibers. And so this contributes to better breathability and more microscopic holes within that layer. And they also are able to spin a hydrophobic, so water repellent fiber, with a hydrophilic, or water loving fiber, to increase the capillary action that we talked about. And overall, I would say the huge innovation is just a focus on sustainability. And this actually is occurring at multiple levels. So water-resistant finishes, we're talking about the perfluoro compounds, which are terrible for the environment. Really, almost all companies are working on phasing that out. And we do have innovation in that area. There's not a single leader at this point in time, but multiple companies are really working on increasing the effectiveness of PFC-free water-resistant finishes. In general, too, I think in terms of the age of information, we see a lot more. We're more aware of the processes that go into textile manufacturing, and there's really an overall improvements and awareness in terms of being sustainable at all levels of the process. So both in terms of just durability of the garments, which is a big thing Patagonia talks about, durability of the garment overall, using less chemicals throughout the process. Use of water is also a big issue, so especially water waste. And so, for example, the Columbia Out-Dry fabric is also, they have a version that uses no dye. So we also have waterless dyeing, where the dye is infused at the fiber stage. And so that really has the use of that kind of technology has really advanced and is becoming much more important overall in industry. And then we talked about microfibers, and use of microfibers is actually concerned about microfibers getting into the water supply. They shed when laundering, and so there's really a lot of innovation in terms of capturing microfibers in the laundering stage, and or more awareness of just some of the impact that microfibers can have. So overall, I think really good news in terms of just being more conscious and making the whole process overall more sustainable, especially for these companies that are really thriving and advocating for enjoyment of the outdoors. So, waterproof breathable technology, helping you weather the elements. And there is a lot of information online as well about all of these aspects. REI has a great website, EVA has a great website, and then you can read about some of the history of Gore-Tex as well online. I have some samples up here. If you want to come take a look, I have samples that compare a 2-layer fabric, a 2.5-layer fabric, and a 3-layer fabric. And I have some samples here where you can actually see, this is a fabric end, but you can actually see the membrane as you take apart some of the layers of the fabric. So there's a couple here where I've actually deconstructed the fabric a little bit. In the back, we also have a hands-on demonstration of how the microporous film works. So these are actually gloves that I got from Gore-Tex, and there are 2 gloves there for you to use. One is the microporous film, and the other one is just a plastic glove. So the idea is to kind of wiggle your hand around a little bit, and so you're producing moisture vapor. And then you can also stick them in the water to experience the waterproofness of it. And you'll notice a difference, even just from your hand, of the comfort level of those 2 gloves. So it's a really nice demonstration of how that waterproof breathability works. So you're welcome to just open a package and take the gloves. You can take them with you if you want, or you can just leave them if you want. So, thank you. Then you have the outer layer of fabric, and then you have the protection on top of that. Okay, so the durable fabric is just sort of a chemical base on top of the fabric, outer layer. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so are you actually kind of doing anything to the Gore-Tex itself?
No.
Okay,
No.
so it's not like you're restoring the Gore-Tex, you're just...
In terms of...
Like recyclability, when you're putting different materials together, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, a lot of the fibers that are used are, have a very long life.
Yeah.
I have one glove that's Gore-Tex and one that's plastic. I put them on and let my hands get a little warm, and now I'm putting them in the water. They're both staying dry, but when I take them out, the hand in the plastic is very sweaty and clammy. You can see how it's got steam in there because it's still hot. It's not very comfortable. But my hand in here in the Gore-Tex is feeling very comfortable.
3 out of the 10 days.
And this is so dry.